as you guys have known for a long time, Thomas Massie is my, there's no such thing as favorite. He just happens to be the congressional representative that, for the most part, I have the most respect for on the Hill. Because I do believe that as much as anybody that is serving in Congress today, he has a certain level of integrity that pretty much nobody else does. And he has voted with progressives on a number of key issues many times, and he's been the lone Republican who's done it. We need more Thomas Massies on Capitol Hill in the rural conservative parts of the United States. That's who we need. And the ironic thing is, he is the best GOP representative, and you can make the argument that Mitch McConnell, Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, I'm probably the worst representative on Capitol Hill. Come on, Kentucky, what are you doing? Institutional politics is the worst kind. That's probably the biggest part of this problem. It's being able to fight that off. But we've got a number of topics here that we're going to cover. As you know, he did an interview with Tucker Carlson. I've seen a little bit of it, but this is going to be a real treat because you're going to get an idea of what a person who is on the political right believes. And this is what is truly in his heart and in his head, because he is not bought and paid for by corporate special interests, and he don't even meet with lobbyists. So here we go on the U.S. debt.
Does it end?
Right now, we're able to finance it because we're the world's reserve currency.
Right.
And when we print more money, which we're doing all the time, the Fed is doing that, we're actually taxing the world. Everybody in the world who holds dollars gets like a 3% transaction fee. I say we're kind of like the credit card at the gas station that gets 3% because you're using that credit card.
Right.
Well, we get 3% from inflation we cause because the world is using our currency. And we can do that as long as they use our currency. But I think it's going to end at some point. They're going to quit using our dollars as reserve currency. I mean, I watched your interview with Putin, and one of the things, whether you hate him or not, one of the things he said that is true is when we sanctioned him, before we sanctioned Russia, 70% of their transactions were in US dollars. And after the sanctions, it's less than 20% of their transactions are in US dollars.
That is okay. So there's a lot to unpack here, but the most important thing that Massie did say, which I agree with 1,000%, is that the sanctions on Russia have completely backfired on our country. And this is what happens when you are in support of endless war, which Russia isn't, and neither is China. I'm not trying to take away the value of other nations around the world, but let's be honest, it basically comes down to our three countries, much as it was written in 1984, in 1949, and very little has changed. The same rules apply. There's three mega powers around the globe. We're one of them. Russia's another. China's the other. And we basically control all these little proxies in between. There's some independent nations like Australia and Japan, and even Germany to an extent, that do pretty well for themselves. And you could even throw the UK in there if you want. But the truth is, and Brazil is obviously up and coming. A lot of these nations are kind of dependent on those three global superpowers. You can make the argument for India. But right now, we are the world's reserve currency. Now, I wish Steve was here to comment, regarding this whole theory about printing money. Now, what I've always said, which I think is important, when it comes to this concept of printing money, it's not actually going to the printing shop and printing dollars. That's not what this is. The problem is that it's basically like, think of like a hose and it's being choked and very little water, if any, is getting out. What's ultimately happening is that it's only being circulated to a very small area, which is usually the people who control most of the money and the power. By doing that, the money does not filter throughout society, and it's why the dollar has been devalued. When only a small portion is getting to control the pie, How else can you possibly balance it? And as I've often said, this has as much to do with anything as it relates to the fact that we do not have a substantial labor movement in this country right now. It's why people like Wasserman Schultz are still getting support from the heads of these labor unions. When you don't have this robust labor movement, what you end up getting is corporate special interests dominating the entire system. It's why rent can't be controlled. It's why private equity owns all the homes, is also getting their hands on our drinking water. It's why fracking is being permitted in this country, even though it clearly does so much more harm than it does good for the purpose of energy extraction, whether it is the man-made earthquakes, whether it is the water contamination, whether it is the contaminated soil. And the communities are not benefiting from the energy extraction. And that's just one example. There's plenty of others that could be given. But this idea that it's this whole idea that we can't print money, that's not true. That's not how it works. I don't get the feeling that that's entirely what Massie was saying, but I do understand where he's coming from. I get it. We are a country that when it comes to and this is where libertarian conservatism is growing leaps and bounds. We are a wasteful spending nation. And nowhere do we waste more money than on the military-industrial complex. That's the ultimate. That's more wasteful spending if there ever was. We'll finish it out on this clip of the U.S. debt.
So what we're doing with all these sanctions, ironically, we're shooting ourselves in the foot every time we sanction a country and say you can't use our currency to have a transaction. We're taking away our ability to charge them 3% for that transaction, because when we print 3% more dollars, we're just taking that money.
Massie, Tucker definitely has the best facial expressions, that is for sure. But I will tell you, the thing about Massie, which is so interesting, is that he is an incredibly intelligent guy. Like he's like Mensa smart. He's at that level. He's also a person who lives off the grid. His entire, I don't know if his home is a compound, but he lives in Northeast Kentucky. The dollar goes a lot further there. So needless to say, he probably can live off of $174,000 a year on a government salary. That's not as easy for people in a lot of other parts of the United States, but for him, that's probably very doable. And so there is a truth to be told about the fact that there are other up-and-coming nations like BRICS right now that are going to figure out a way to get away from the US dollar. And when that happens, no amount of MMT is going to help us, because what nations are trying to do is avoid doing business with us if they can get away with it. And what's happening in Gaza is accelerating that. It is accelerating other nations around the world from saying, if there is any way that we can get away from the United States, we're in. Now, they're not there yet, and it may still take a lot of time, but we are heading down a very dangerous road right now with our foreign policy positions. The way we are antagonizing Russia with Ukraine, and the way that we are going full bore in a genocide in the Middle East, in Israel. Without question, this is just one of many. And that's not even the coup de grace. The coup de grace is if we have the audacity to go into the South China Sea and get involved with Taiwan against China. That's the end. That's the true end game if we're going to go there. Will it happen? I don't know. But hopefully enough people are starting to get very concerned about that fact. I know I'm concerned. And I do think that if anybody has had the audacity to try to stand up to this, at least on the GOP side, it's Thomas Massie when it comes to voting against Israel, which he talks about right here.
Last month, we voted like 15 or 16 times on issues related to Israel. And, I've been hit because I voted no on all of those.
Why do you, because you hate Israel, or is there another reason?
No, because I'm against sending our money overseas. I'm against starting another proxy war. I'm against sanctions because it's going to weaken the dollar. I'm for free speech. Like all of these resolutions run afoul of those things. And that's why I can't vote for them.
I like how Tucker admits that he is, I don't know if he's spectrum autistic or whatever it is, but he's admitted as much. I love how he's such a pot stirrer. He can't help himself. He's like, what, do you hate Israel? Is that what it is? And we all know he's messing around, but it is interesting to watch him do that.
Tell us what the free speech part of it.
So recently they brought a bill to Congress, and this was actually a binding bill, not a non-binding resolution. Like this was going to have the effect of law, and people would get, prosecuted if they engaged in anti-Semitism on campuses. And the problem with this bill is they use some international definition of anti-Semitism on a website somewhere. My first question is, why don't you just put the definition in the bill? Why are you pointing to somebody's URL in a piece of legislation?
You are the Congress, right?
Right. We are the
Congress. Write the laws.
We should be. Instead, we're referencing a website that's not even, hosted in the United States.
It goes to show you just how powerful the lobby truly is. Extremely powerful. Great to hear, Mario. I heard Jen's a pretty nice person on the phone. That I've heard. But because Massie has had the audacity to challenge the Israel lobby, his most recent election had AIPAC throwing over $400,000 in negative advertising against him. We'll talk about that here.
So what's AIPAC?
AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And they didn't start out as a PAC in the sense of a political action committee, but now they have a political action committee. Ostensibly, it's a group of Americans who lobby on behalf of Israel. They're for anything Israel. And they're a very effective lobbying group. They get in there. They try to get me to write a white paper as a candidate, for instance, for Congress. They almost get
on what?
On Israel. And I wouldn't do it. And they said, why? And I'm like, I don't do homework for lobbyists, right?
Why can't every fucking representative on Capitol Hill say what Thomas Massie just said? I don't do homework for lobbyists. I don't take your money. I don't answer to you. And the problem, of course, is that we do not have a system that brings in the best kind of people. Massie does talk in the interview about how he, in some ways, kind of slipped into Congress. If they had any idea that he was going to be like this, if he got in, you better believe they would have moved heaven and earth to stop him. No question about it.
I didn't like writing term papers at college. I'm not writing one for you.
What did they say?
They said, oh, well, here, just copy Rand Paul's term paper and put your name on it. We'll accept that. And I'm like, no, I'm still not cribbing somebody else's homework to do homework. I'm not turning in my homework for you. And what? You're laughing, but you know what? I bet I may be the only Republican in Congress who hasn't done homework for AIPAC.
If there is anybody who should replace, if there's anybody who's going to replace me once I'm no longer in the United States Senate, it's definitely Thomas Massie. Not that Mitch McConnell would want Thomas Massie to replace him, but if there is a congressional representative who should be in the upper chamber that's on the political right, imagine replacing Mitch McConnell with Thomas Massie. Now that would be a welcome change in our political arena, not just the GOP. We'll continue.
And it's just what it is. It's conditioning. They want you to do something very simple and benign, and for them, they don't really grade your term paper. They just want to know that you'll do something for them. And if you'll do something for them as a candidate, you're more likely to do something for them as a congressman when you get in there. So my rift started out in 2012 when I refused to turn in an Israel term paper.
And how did they respond to that?
Well, they kind of got in my race a little too late there in the beginning, and because it was hard to tell that I was actually going to win. And when they saw I was going to win, that's when they tried to get me to do the term paper.
What I find interesting is that it's not just that they disagree with your views, which they do, and I think they have an absolute right to disagree with anybody's views. We all do. But they've called you a bigot, and they call you an anti-Semite and say you're a hater and try to destroy your character. That seems like a very different level of response to me.
Right. There's no need to do that. I'm not anti-Semitic. I don't have an anti-Semitic hair in my head. Okay. I mean, I don't like AIPAC anymore. Like, I used to be neutral toward AIPAC, right? But I have no antagonistic feelings toward Jewish people. I am the last thing. I think I'm probably the least xenophobic person in Congress. I mean, these are the guys that my colleagues want to sanction everybody, declare them terrorist states, come up with these strongly worded resolutions. I don't vote for any of that crap, right? Unless somebody does harm to me, I'm not going to call them anything. So I get called names just for staying out of all of this political posturing.
That's disgusting, though, isn't it?
I guess
attack your character. They can disagree with your views,
right.
but to call you like the worst thing you can be in America, like, that's disgusting.
I have a thick skin.
He may have a thick skin, but there's one thing that Massie did there that I don't agree with. Don't apologize. You have nothing to apologize for. You stood up to one of the most powerful political lobbying groups in the world, and you survived fairly easily. So did Summer Lee. I do believe if Jamal Bowman survives in New York, that's going to really make things interesting between Jen and Wasserman Schultz. I think people are sick of this shit. And they should be. We should be sick in general of our federally elected representatives, especially, who do not have term limits, getting away with this shit. This is one of the reasons why our country is going straight to hell, and has been for a long time. Which is why, even if there are things that you disagree with Massie on, just know he is an ally, whether you believe it or not. He is not bought and paid for by this system. That's the baseline. That is the baseline, should be for everybody. With few exceptions. Few exceptions. Do you think that I would take Nancy Pelosi over Thomas Massie? Do you think I would take Eric Swalwell over Thomas Massie? Do you think I would take Debbie Wasserman Schultz over Thomas Massie? Would you?